And welcome back to another podcast with Mr. Hagan. On this podcast, we're going to bring all of our models together: the long-run aggregate supply, the short-run aggregate supply, the aggregate demand, the demand and supply for money and monetary policy. We're going to bring all that together into one big model. So let's go ahead and go through some examples of this. So let's start with the following real world event. Let's say that we get a recession. We get a recession in Europe. So the European economies fall into recession. And if they fall into recession, okay, so far nothing's new from what we've been doing in other playlists with aggregate supply, aggregate demand. My determinant is just going to be on the demand side. This is going to be a change in net exports, foreign income. So we're assuming, I should say this at the beginning, we are assuming this is the United States economy that we are analyzing. So this is United States gross domestic product, United States price level. This is the supply of money in the United States, interest rates in the United States, and we get a change in net exports, foreign income. Foreign countries fall into recession. That means they buy fewer of our goods, and that means that exports go down, and that means that net exports are going to go down. So that all means that the aggregate demand curve is going to shift into the left. The aggregate demand curve is going to shift in to the left. The aggregate demand curve shifts into the left. And when it does, the aggregate demand curve shifts into left. That means foreigners are buying fewer of our goods, and that means that our prices are going to begin to fall. Prices in the United States are going to begin to fall. So let's record what's happened so far. My aggregate demand story is going to be a decrease in foreign incomes causes a decrease in net exports. That's our aggregate demand story. My aggregate supply story is the real wages story. So let's see. We said real wages are going to be equal to, let me just give myself a little bit more space. Real wages are going to be equal to nominal wages divided by the price level, and the price level is going to go down in the United States as people buy fewer of our goods. Prices are going to go down. If wages are sticky in the short run, nominal wages are sticky because of labor contracts or whatever, that means real wages now are going to begin to rise. And if real wages begin to rise, then that means that companies will decrease hiring. They will hire fewer people. They will hire fewer workers. And so we are now falling into recession. Production will go down, and we are into a recession. So that's what's happened so far. Now, we have a couple responses to this. Let's record this before we talk about that. The aggregate demand curve has shifted into the left, and that's going to cause a decrease in prices, a decrease in the gross domestic product, and an increase in unemployment. So we're in a recession. And so what's the problem? The big problem is right here. We're in a recession. Well, I guess it'd be these two together. Is the big problem. Decreased GDP and rising unemployment. Now, there's three possible responses to this. Two of them we've already talked about on previous videos. Response number one is the classical response. If you're a classical economist, then you're just going to wait this out. Unemployment rates are going up. If unemployment rates are going up, that means that wages are going to start to fall, and then that's going to, as wages fall, that's going to cause the short-run aggregate supply curve to shift to the right, and that's going to move us back down to, or move us up to a higher level of gross domestic product, back to our long-run equilibrium, etc. All right, now, you don't want to write that in your notes. If you're taking notes on this, let's back that up. That was a classical response. All right, we're not doing classical right now. We're doing monetary policy. A Keynesian response would be fiscal policy. So the Keynesian would come in and say, "Oh, okay, we're in a recession. Let's increase government spending and decrease taxes, and that will shift the aggregate demand curve back to the right, and then we would be back to long-run equilibrium." So we've talked about all of those on previous playlists. So let's back that up and get rid of it. Instead, what we want to focus on right now is monetary policy. So we could do nothing, be classical. We could engage in expansionary fiscal policy, be Keynesian, or we could use monetary policy. So now, what's that going to look like, monetary policy? Well, the Federal Reserve has control of the money supply, and over here we are at an equilibrium level of interest rates, and the current level of the money supply is at Q1, and the Federal Reserve could come in, and the real world event is that they could either buy or sell bonds. So which one's it going to be? Well, we got to think this backwards in reverse. If we want to get the aggregate demand curve to shift back to the right, that means we want to increase investment and increase consumption. And if we want to increase investment and increase consumption, then we got to lower interest rates to encourage people to borrow so that they will consume and invest more. So I need interest rates to go down. So that means I need the money supply to go. I'll show you all this in a moment. I'm just thinking it in reverse. I need that supply curve to shift out to the right, which means I need to increase the money supply. Well, if I want to increase the money supply, then, okay, let's see. Let's just draw a picture of this. If I want to increase the money supply, let's see. Here's the Federal Reserve. Here's the Fed, and here are people and banks and so forth. And let's see, what would happen if if the Federal Reserve would go out and buy bonds? If the Federal Reserve buys bonds, if they're gonna go out and buy bonds, then people are going to give bonds to the Federal Reserve, and the Federal Reserve is going to give them money. And if the Federal Reserve gives them money, then that money is going to get deposited in their savings accounts, checking accounts, and so forth. And that's going to increase the M1 or M2 money supply. So, okay, there's our policy. Buy bonds. So let's record that. My real world event, buy bonds. The Federal Reserve is going to go out and begin buying up bonds. If the Federal Reserve buys bonds, then, okay, here we go. If the Federal Reserve buys bonds, that's going to, we just set it down here, that's going to increase the money supply. So the money supply now is going to shift out to the right. And if the money supply shifts out to the right to Q2, now there's more money out there. That's going to put downward pressure on interest rates. So interest rates are now going to fall. If interest rates fall, then my determinant, I have two of them. That's going to be a change in consumption interest rates. Interest rates go down so people consume more. Change in investment interest rates go down, people invest more. Why? Because when interest rates go down, people are going to borrow more money, they're going to demand to borrow more money, and then they're going to use that money to engage in consumption or investment. Both of those, consumption and investment, then are going to cause the aggregate demand curve to shift to the right. And so the aggregate demand curve is going to shift to the right, moving us back to the old demand curve, moving us back along the short run aggregate supply curve, and moving us back towards the equilibrium position that we were in to begin with. So, okay, what's going to happen? My aggregate demand story is going to be that we're going to get an increase in consumption. Let me back that up. First, let's say we're going to get a decrease in interest rates, and that's going, try that one more time, decrease in interest rates, which is going to increase consumption, and the decrease in interest rates is going to increase investment, and both of those things shift the aggregate demand curve to the right. As the aggregate demand curve shifts to the right, then people start buying stuff, and when they start buying stuff, they start bidding up the prices, and as they bid up prices, okay, here's my real wage is equal to the nominal wage over the price index. And so let's see, prices are now getting bid up as people start buying stuff again. The Federal Reserve is pushing money out there into the economy, and people are borrowing that money and using it to buy stuff. And when they buy stuff, prices go up. Nominal wages in the short run are fixed. So as prices go up, real wages are going to go down. As real wages go down, companies will respond to that by hiring more people, increase in the amount of hiring. So companies will hire more people, and gross domestic product will go back up. And so we will end up with the price level returning to where it started, the gross domestic product returning to where it started, unemployment returning to where it started, and we've brought the recession to an end. So that's monetary policy. So instead of just using the classical theory and just kind of staying out of the way, instead of using the Keynesian fiscal policy, which can cause increases in government debt and things like that, instead of worrying about those, we could just use monetary policy in order to have the Federal Reserve buy and sell bonds and shift the aggregate demand curve. So let's say finally, what was my final answer to this question? If I'm working for the Federal Reserve, what's my answer to the question here? I say, what was my original problem? The original problem that we had was we were in a recession. That was my original problem, is the country fell into recession. So what was the policy solution? What was the policy that we recommended? I should write that out here. The policy solution to this problem was for the Federal Reserve to go out and buy bonds, for the Federal Reserve to begin buying bonds. All right, that's a lot of stuff there, but that's it. That's there's really only two things that can happen here. You can either have when we're talking about monetary policy, you can either have the Federal Reserve buy bonds, and we just did it. There it is. And on another podcast, we'll look at what happens when the Federal Reserve has to sell bonds. Those are the only two possible things that could happen. All right, this has been Mr. Hagan on another podcast. Thanks for joining me, and we'll see you on the next podcast.